Welcome to A Setting of Silver. This podcast exists to make historic Christian writings accessible to 21st century listeners. While not as valuable as the Bible, we can still learn much from the faith and practice of those who followed in the footsteps of the apostles. It's my hope that wherever you find yourself, these words, carried through time, would encourage you to walk in faith with Jesus. Little is known with complete certainty about Hippolytus. He was born around AD 170, possibly in Asia Minor or Alexandria, and ended up at the church in Rome. A disciple of Irenaeus, he became part of church leadership sometime between 198 and 217 when, likely having become a bishop in Rome himself, he fiercely opposed the election of the bishop Calixtus due to differing theological convictions regarding the Trinity. He remained committed to his theological positions through the next two bishops and in 235, was deported to Sardina where he died within the year. Hippolytus' greatest extant work is his Against All Heresies, a voluminous catalogue of diverse and heterodox doctrines present in the church of his day. It consisted of a series of 10 books, 2 of which are now lost, that built on the work of Irenaeus to categorize and classify heresies based on their relationship to pagan and Greek philosophy. While lengthy, this series of books provides the modern reader an invaluable understanding of the thoughts and ideas present in the ancient world. From numerology to the zodiac, one begins to get a sense of the strange beliefs that pervaded the cultural milieu of the early church. In this environment, it is perhaps no wonder that so many diverse opinions became dangerous to those within the church. It also serves as a reminder today that many things which could appear benign on the surface are, in fact, derived from ideas opposed to Scripture. Hippolytus' conviction that all true Christian doctrine must be consistent with the Holy Scriptures remains a necessary criterion for believers today. And now, please enjoy Book 9 of Hippolytus' Refutation of All Heresies.
The following are the contents of the 9th book of the Refutation of All Heresies. What the blasphemous folly is of Noetus, and that he devoted himself to the tenets of Heraclitus the obscure, not to those of Christ. And how Calixtus, intermingling the heresy of Cleomenes, the disciple of Noetus, with that of Theodotus, constructed another more novel heresy, and what sort the life of this heretic was. What was the recent arrival, at Rome, of the strange spirit Elchasai, and that there served as a concealment of his peculiar errors his apparent adhesion to the law, when in point of fact he devotes himself to the tenets of the Gnostics, or even of the astrologists, and to the arts of sorcery. What the customs of the Jews are, and how many diversities of opinion there are, amongst them. A lengthened conflict, then, having been maintained concerning all heresies by us who, at all events, have not left any unrefuted, the greatest struggle now remains behind, viz. to furnish an account and refutation of those heresies that have sprung up in our own day, by which certain ignorant and presumptuous men have attempted to scatter abroad the Church, and have introduced the greatest confusion among all the faithful throughout the entire world. For it seems expedient that we, making an onslaught upon the opinion which constitutes the prime source of contemporaneous evils, should prove what are the originating principles of this opinion, in order that its offshoots, becoming a matter of general notoriety, may be made the object of universal scorn. There has appeared one, Noetus by name, and by birth a native of Smyrna. This person introduced a heresy from the tenets of Heraclitus. Now a certain man called Epigonus becomes his minister and pupil. And this person during his sojourn at Rome disseminated his godless opinion. But Cleomenes, who had become his disciple, an alien both in way of life and habits from the Church, was wont to corroborate the Noetian doctrine. At that time, Zephyrinus imagines that he administers the affairs of the Church, an uninformed and shamefully corrupt man. And he, being persuaded by proffered gain, was accustomed to connive at those who were present for the purpose of becoming disciples of Cleomenes. But, Zephyrinus, himself, being in process of time enticed away, hurried headlong into the same opinions, and he had Calixtus as his adviser, and a fellow champion of these wicked tenets. But the life of this, Calixtus, and the heresy invented by him, I shall after a little explain. The school of these heretics during the succession of such bishops, continued to acquire strength and augmentation, from the fact that Zephyrinus and Calixtus helped them to prevail. Never at any time, however, have we been guilty of collusion with them. But we have frequently offered them opposition, and have refuted them, and have forced them reluctantly to acknowledge the truth. And they, abashed and constrained by the truth, have confessed their errors for a short period, but after a little, wallow once again in the same mire. But since we have exhibited the succession of their genealogy, it seems expedient next that we should also explain the depraved teaching involved in their doctrines. For this purpose we shall first adduce the opinions advanced by Heraclitus, the obscure, and we shall next make manifest what are the portions of these opinions that are of Heraclitean origin. Such parts of their system its present champions are not aware belong to the obscure philosopher, but they imagine them to belong to Christ. But if they might happen to fall in with the following observations, perhaps they thus might be put out of countenance, and induced to desist from this godless blasphemy of theirs. Now, even though the opinion of Heraclitus has been expounded by us previously in the Philosophumena, it nevertheless seems expedient now also to set down side by side in contrast the two systems, in order that by this closer refutation they may be evidently instructed. I mean the followers of this heretic, who imagine themselves to be disciples of Christ, when in reality they are not so, but of the obscure. Heraclitus then says that the universe is one, divisible and indivisible, generated and ungenerated, mortal and immortal, reason, eternity, Father, Son, and justice, God. For those who hearken not to me, but the doctrine, it is wise that they acknowledge all things to be one, says Heraclitus. And because all do not know or confess this, he utters a reproof somewhat in the following terms. People do not understand how what is diverse, nevertheless, coincides with itself, just like the inverse harmony of a bow and lyre. But that reason always exists, inasmuch as it constitutes the universe, and as it pervades all things, he affirms in this manner. But in regard of this reason, which always exists, men are continually devoid of understanding, both before they have heard of it and in first hearing of it. For though all things take place according to this reason, they seem like persons devoid of any experience regarding it. Still they attempt both words and works of such a description as I am giving an account of, by making a division according to nature, and declaring how things are. And that a Son is the universe and throughout endless ages an eternal King of all things, he thus asserts. A sporting child, playing at his dice, is eternity. The kingdom is that of a child. And that the Father of all things that have been generated is an unbegotten creature who is creator. Let us hear Heraclitus affirming in these words. Contrariety is a progenitor of all things, and king of all. And it exhibited some as gods, but others as men, and made some slaves, whereas others free. And, he likewise affirms, that there is a harmony, as in a bow and lyre. That obscure harmony is better, though unknown and invisible to men, he asserts in these words. An obscure harmony is preferable to an obvious one. He commends and admires before what is known, that which is unknown and invisible in regard of its power. And that harmony visible to men, and not incapable of being discovered, is better, he asserts in these words. Whatever things are objects of vision, hearing, and intelligence, these I preeminently honor, he says. That is, he prefers things visible to those that are invisible. From such expressions of his it is easy to understand the spirit of his philosophy. Men, he says, are deceived in reference to the knowledge of manifest things similarly with Homer, who was wiser than all the Greeks. For even children killing vermin deceived him, when they said, What we have seen and seized, these we leave behind, whereas what we neither have seen nor seized, these we carry away. In this manner Heraclitus assigns to the visible an equality of position and honor with the invisible, as if what was visible and what was invisible were confessedly some one thing. For he says, an obscure harmony is preferable to an obvious one, and, whatsoever things are objects of vision, hearing, and intelligence, that is, of the corporeal organs, these, he says, I preeminently honor, not, on this occasion, though previously, having preeminently honored invisible things. Therefore neither darkness, nor light, nor evil, nor good, Heraclitus affirms, is different, but one and the same thing. At all events, he censures Hesiod because he knew not day and night. For day, he says, and night are one, expressing himself somehow thus. The teacher, however, of a vast amount of information is Hesiod, and people suppose this poet to be possessed of an exceedingly large store of knowledge, and yet he did not know the nature of day and night, for they are one. As regards both what is good and what is bad, they are, according to Heraclitus, likewise, one. Physicians, undoubtedly, says Heraclitus, when they make incisions and cauterize, though in every respect they wickedly torture the sick, complain that they do not receive fitting remuneration from their patients, notwithstanding that they perform these salutary operations upon diseases. And both straight and twisted are, he says, the same. The way is straight and curved of the carders of wool, and the circular movement of an instrument in the fuller's shop called a screw is straight and curved, for it revolves up and circularly at the same time. One and the same, he says, are, therefore, straight and curved. And upward and downward, he says, are one and the same. The way up and the way down are the same. And he says that what is filthy and what is pure are one and the same, and what is drinkable and unfit for drink are one and the same. See, he says, is water very pure and very foul, drinkable to fishes no doubt, and salutary for them, but not fit to be used as drink by men, and, for them, pernicious. And, confessedly, he asserts that what is immortal is mortal, and that what is mortal is immortal, in the following expressions: immortals are mortal, and mortals are immortal, that is, when the one derive life from death, and the other death from life. And he affirms also that there is a resurrection of this palpable flesh in which we have been born, and he knows God to be the cause of this resurrection, expressing himself in this manner: those that are here will God enable to arise and become guardians of quick and dead. And he likewise affirms that a judgment of the world and all things in it takes place by fire, expressing himself thus: now, thunder pilots all things, that is, directs them, meaning by the thunder everlasting fire. But he also asserts that this fire is endued with intelligence, and a cause of the management of the universe, and he denominates it craving and satiety. Now craving is, according to him, the arrangement of the world, whereas satiety its destruction. For, says he, the fire, coming upon the earth, will judge and seize all things. But in this chapter Heraclitus simultaneously explains the entire peculiarity of his mode of thinking, but at the same time the characteristic quality of the heresy of Noetus. And I have briefly demonstrated Noetus to be not a disciple of Christ, but of Heraclitus. For this philosopher asserts that the primal world is itself the demiurge and creator of itself in the following passage: God is day, night, winter, summer, war, peace, surfeit, famine. All things are contraries. This appears his meaning, but an alteration takes place, just as if incense were mixed with other sorts of incense, but denominated according to the pleasurable sensation produced by each sort. Now it is evident to all that the silly successors of Noetus, and the champions of his heresy, even though they have not been hearers of the discourses of Heraclitus, nevertheless, at any rate when they adopt the opinions of Noetus, undisguisedly acknowledge these Heraclitean tenets. For they advance statements after this manner: that one and the same God is the creator and father of all things, and that when it pleased him, he nevertheless appeared, though invisible, to just men of old. For when he is not seen he is invisible, and he is incomprehensible when he does not wish to be comprehended, but comprehensible when he is comprehended. Wherefore it is that, according to the same account, he is invincible and vincible, unbegotten and begotten, immortal and mortal. How shall not persons holding this description of opinions be proved to be disciples of Heraclitus? Did not Heraclitus, the obscure, anticipate Noetus in framing a system of philosophy, according to identical modes of expression? Now, that Noetus affirms that the Son and Father are the same, no one is ignorant. But he makes his statement thus: when indeed, then, the Father had not been born, he yet was justly styled Father, and when it pleased him to undergo generation, having been begotten, he himself became his own Son, not another's. For in this manner he thinks to establish the sovereignty of God, alleging that Father and Son, so called, are one and the same substance, not one individual produced from a different one, but himself from himself, and that he is styled by name Father and Son, according to vicissitude of times. But that he is one who has appeared amongst us, both having submitted to generation from a virgin, and as a man having held converse among men. And, on account of the birth that had taken place, he confessed himself to those beholding him a son, no doubt. Yet he made no secret to those who could comprehend him of his being a father. That this person suffered by being fastened to the tree, and that he commended his spirit unto himself, having died to appearance, and not being, in reality, dead. And he raised himself up the third day, after having been interred in a sepulchre, and wounded with a spear, and perforated with nails. Cleomenes asserts, in common with his band of followers, that this person is God and Father of the universe, and thus introduces among many an obscurity of thought, such as we find in the philosophy of Heraclitus. Calixtus attempted to confirm this heresy, a man cunning in wickedness, and subtle where deceit was concerned, and who was impelled by restless ambition to mount the episcopal throne. Now this man molded to his purpose Zephyrinus, an ignorant and illiterate individual, and one unskilled in ecclesiastical definitions. And inasmuch as Zephyrinus was accessible to bribes and covetous, Calixtus, by luring him through presents, and by illicit demands, was enabled to seduce him into whatever course of action he pleased. And so it was that Calixtus succeeded in inducing Zephyrinus to create continually disturbances among the brethren, while he himself took care subsequently, by knavish words, to attach both factions in goodwill to himself. And, at one time, to those who entertained true opinions, he would in private allege that they held similar doctrines, with himself, and thus make them his dupes, while at another time he would act similarly towards those who embraced the tenets of Sabellius. But Calixtus perverted Sabellius himself, and this, too, though he had the ability of rectifying this heretic's error. For, at any time, during our admonition Sabellius did not evince obduracy, but as long as he continued alone with Calixtus, he was wrought upon to relapse into the system of Cleomenes by this very Calixtus, who alleges that he entertains similar opinions to Cleomenes. Sabellius, however, did not then perceive the knavery of Calixtus, but he afterwards came to be aware of it, as I shall narrate presently. Now Calixtus brought forward Zephyrinus himself, and induced him publicly to avow the following sentiments. I know that there is one God, Jesus Christ. Nor except him do I know any other that is begotten and amenable to suffering. And on another occasion, when he would make the following statement, the Father did not die, but the Son. Zephyrinus would in this way continue to keep up ceaseless disturbance among the people. And we, becoming aware of his sentiments, did not give place to him, but reproved and withstood him for the truth's sake. And he hurried headlong into folly, from the fact that all consented to his hypocrisy. We, however, did not do so, and called us worshippers of two gods, disgorging, independent of compulsion, the venom lurking within him. It would seem to us desirable to explain the life of this heretic, inasmuch as he was born about the same time with ourselves, in order that, by the exposure of the habits of a person of this description, the heresy attempted to be established by him may be easily known, and may perchance be regarded as silly, by those endued with intelligence. This Calixtus became a martyr at the period when Fusianus was prefect of Rome, and the mode of his martyrdom was as follows. Calixtus happened to be a domestic of one Kerpiphorus, a man of the faith belonging to the household of Caesar. To this Calixtus, as being of the faith, Kerpiphorus committed no inconsiderable amount of money, and directed him to bring in profitable returns from the banking business. And he, receiving the money, tried the experiment of a bank in what is called the Piscina Publica. And in process of time were entrusted to him not a few deposits by widows and brethren, under the ostensive cause of lodging their money with Kerpiphorus. Calixtus, however, made away with all the moneys committed to him, and became involved in pecuniary difficulties. And after having practiced such conduct as this, there was not wanting one to tell Kerpiphorus, and the latter stated that he would require an account from him. Calixtus, perceiving these things, and suspecting danger from his master, escaped away by stealth, directing his flight towards the sea. And finding a vessel in Portus ready for a voyage, he went on board, intending to sail wherever she happened to be bound for. But not even in this way could he avoid detection, for there was not wanting one who conveyed to Kerpiphorus intelligence of what had taken place. But Kerpiphorus, in accordance with the information he had received, at once repaired to the harbour, Portus, and made an effort to hurry into the vessel after Calixtus. The boat, however, was anchored in the middle of the harbour, and as the ferryman was slow in his movements, Calixtus, who was in the ship, had time to descry his master at a distance. And knowing that himself would be inevitably captured, he became reckless of life, and, considering his affairs to be in a desperate condition, he proceeded to cast himself into the sea. But the sailors leapt into boats and drew him out, unwilling to come, while those on shore were raising a loud cry. And thus Calixtus was handed over to his master, and brought to Rome, and his master lodged him in the Pistrinum. But as time wore on, as happens to take place in such cases, brethren repaired to Kerpiphorus, and entreated him that he would release the fugitive serf from punishment, on the plea of their alleging that Calixtus acknowledged himself to have money lying to his credit with certain persons. But Kerpiferus, as a devout man, said he was indifferent regarding his own property, but that he felt a concern for the deposits. For many shed tears as they remarked to him, that they had committed what they had entrusted to Calixtus, under the ostensive cause of lodging the money with himself. And Kerpiferus yielded to their persuasions, and gave directions for the liberation of Calixtus. The latter, however, having nothing to pay, and not being able again to abscond, from the fact of his being watched, planned an artifice by which he hoped to meet death. Now, pretending that he was repairing as it were to his creditors, he hurried on their Sabbath day to the synagogue of the Jews, who were congregated, and took his stand, and created a disturbance among them. They, however, being disturbed by him, offered him insult, and inflicted blows upon him, and dragged him before Fusianus, who was prefect of the city. And, on being asked the cause of such treatment, they replied in the following terms: Romans have conceded to us the privilege of publicly reading those laws of ours that have been handed down from our fathers. This person, however, by coming into our place of worship, prevented us so doing, by creating a disturbance among us, alleging that he is a Christian. And Fusianus happens at the time to be on the judgment seat, and on intimating his indignation against Calixtus, on account of the statements made by the Jews, there was not wanting one to go and acquaint Kerpiferus concerning these transactions. And he, hastening to the judgment seat of the prefect, exclaimed, I implore of you, my lord Fusianus, believe not thou this fellow. For he is not a Christian, but seeks occasion of death, having made away with a quantity of my money, as I shall prove. The Jews, however, supposing that this was a stratagem, as if Kerpiferus were seeking under this pretext to liberate Calixtus, with the greater enmity clamoured against him in presence of the prefect. Fusianus, however, was swayed by these Jews, and having scourged Calixtus, he gave him to be sent to a mine in Sardinia. But after a time, there being in that place other martyrs, Marcia, a concubine of Commodus, who was a God-loving female, and desirous of performing some good work, invited into her presence the blessed Victor, who was at that time a bishop of the church, and inquired of him what martyrs were in Sardinia. And he delivered to her the names of all, but did not give the name of Calixtus, knowing the villainous acts he had ventured upon. Marcia, obtaining her request from Commodus, hands the letter of emancipation to Hyacinthus, a certain eunuch, rather advanced in life. And he, on receiving it, sailed away into Sardinia, and having delivered the letter to the person who at that time was governor of the territory, he succeeded in having the martyrs released, with the exception of Calixtus. But Calixtus himself, dropping on his knees and weeping, entreated that he likewise might obtain a release. Hyacinthus, therefore, overcome by the captive's importunity, requests the governor to grant a release, alleging that permission had been given to himself from Marcia to liberate Calixtus, and that he would make arrangements that there should be no risk in this to him. Now the governor was persuaded, and liberated Calixtus also. And when the latter arrived at Rome, Victor was very much grieved at what had taken place, but since he was a compassionate man, he took no action in the matter. Guarding, however, against the reproach uttered by many, for the attempts made by this Calixtus were not distant occurrences, and because Kerpiferus also still continued adverse, Victor sends Calixtus to take up his abode in Antium, having settled on him a certain monthly allowance for food. And after Victor's death, Zephyrinus, having had Calixtus as a fellow worker in the management of his clergy, paid him respect to his own damage, and transferring this person from Antium, appointed him over the cemetery. And Calixtus, who was in the habit of always associating with Zephyrinus, and, as I have previously stated, of paying him hypocritical service, disclosed, by force of contrast, Zephyrinus to be a person able neither to form a judgment of things said, nor discerning the design of Calixtus, who was accustomed to converse with Zephyrinus on topics which yielded satisfaction to the latter. Thus, after the death of Zephyrinus, supposing that he had obtained the position, after which he so eagerly pursued, he excommunicated Sabellius, as not entertaining orthodox opinions. He acted thus from apprehension of me, and imagining that he could in this manner obliterate the charge against him among the churches, as if he did not entertain strange opinions. He was then an impostor and knave, and in process of time hurried away many with him. And having even venom embedded in his heart, and forming no correct opinion on any subject, and yet withal being ashamed to speak the truth, this Calixtus, not only on account of his publicly saying in the way of reproach to us, Ye are ditheists, but also on account of his being frequently accused by Sabellius, as one that had transgressed his first faith, devised some such heresy as the following. Calixtus alleges that the Logos himself is Son, and that himself is Father, and that though denominated by a different title, yet that in reality he is one indivisible Spirit. And he maintains that the Father is not one person and the Son another, but that they are one and the same, and that all things are full of the divine Spirit, both those above and those below. And he affirms that the Spirit, which became incarnate in the Virgin, is not different from the Father, but one and the same. And he adds, that this is what has been declared by the Saviour. Believest thou not that I am in the Father, and the Father in me? For that which is seen, which is man, he considers to be the Son, whereas the Spirit, which was contained in the Son, to be the Father. For, says Calixtus, I will not profess belief in two gods, Father and Son, but in one. For the Father, who subsisted in the Son himself, after he had taken unto himself our flesh, raised it to the nature of deity, by bringing it into union with himself, and made it one, so that Father and Son must be styled one God, and that this person being one, cannot be two. And in this way Calixtus contends that the Father suffered along with the Son. For he does not wish to assert that the Father suffered, and as one person, being careful to avoid blasphemy against the Father. How careful he is! Senseless and knavish fellow, who improvises blasphemies in every direction, only that he may not seem to speak in violation of the truth, and is not abashed at being at one time betrayed into the tenet of Sabellius, whereas at another into the doctrine of Theodotus. The impostor Calixtus, having ventured on such opinions, established a school of theology in antagonism to the Church, adopting the foregoing system of instruction. And he first invented the device of conniving with men in regard of their indulgence in sensual pleasures, saying that all had their sins forgiven by himself. For he who is in the habit of attending the congregation of anyone else, and is called a Christian, should he commit any transgression, the sin, they say, is not reckoned unto him, provided only he hurries off and attaches himself to the school of Calixtus. And many persons were gratified with his regulation, as being stricken in conscience, and at the same time having been rejected by numerous sects, while also some of them, in accordance with our condemnatory sentence, had been by us forcibly ejected from the Church. Now such disciples as these passed over to these followers of Calixtus, and served to crowd his school. This one propounded the opinion, that, if a bishop was guilty of any sin, if even a sin unto death, he ought not to be deposed. About the time of this man, bishops, priests, and deacons, who had been twice married, and thrice married, began to be allowed to retain their place among the clergy. If also, however, any one who is in holy orders should become married, Calixtus permitted such a one to continue in holy orders as if he had not sinned. And in justification, he alleges that what has been spoken by the apostle has been declared in reference to this person. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? But he asserted that likewise the parable of the tares is uttered in reference to this one. Let the tares grow along with the wheat. Or, in other words, let those who in the Church are guilty of sin remain in it. But also he affirmed that the Ark of Noé was made for a symbol of the Church, in which were both dogs, and wolves, and ravens, and all things clean and unclean. And so he alleges that the case should stand in like manner with the Church. And as many parts of Scripture bearing on this view of the subject as he could collect, he so interpreted. And the hearers of Calixtus being delighted with his tenets, continue with him, thus mocking both themselves as well as many others, and crowds of these dupes stream together into his school. Wherefore also his pupils are multiplied, and they plume themselves upon the crowds, attending the school, for the sake of pleasures which Christ did not permit. But in contempt of him, they place restraint on the commission of no sin, alleging that they pardon those who acquiesce in Calixtus' opinions. For even also he permitted females, if they were unwedded, and burned with passion at an age at all events unbecoming, or if they were not disposed to overturn their own dignity through a legal marriage, that they might have whomsoever they would choose as a bedfellow, whether a slave or free, and that a woman, though not legally married, might consider such a companion as a husband. Whence women, reputed believers, began to resort to drugs for producing sterility, and to gird themselves round, so to expel what was being conceived on account of their not wishing to have a child either by a slave or by any paltry fellow, for the sake of their family and excessive wealth. Behold, into how great impiety that lawless one has proceeded, by inculcating adultery and murder at the same time. And withal, after such audacious acts, they, lost to all shame, attempt to call themselves a Catholic Church. And some, under the supposition that they will attain prosperity, concur with them. During the episcopate of this one, second baptism was for the first time presumptuously attempted by them. These, then, are the practices and opinions which that most astonishing Calixtus established, whose school continues, preserving its customs and tradition, not discerning with whom they ought to communicate, but indiscriminately offering communion to all. And from him they have derived the denomination of their cognomen, so that, on account of Calixtus being a foremost champion of such practices, they should be called Calixtians. The doctrine of this Calixtus having been noised abroad throughout the entire world, a cunning man, and full of desperation, one called Alcibiades, dwelling in Apamea, a city of Syria, examined carefully into this business. And considering himself a more formidable character, and more ingenious in such tricks, than Calixtus, he repaired to Rome. And he brought some book, alleging that a certain just man, Elchasai, had received this from Sarai, a town of Parthia, and that he gave it to one called Sobai. And the contents of this volume, he alleged, had been revealed by an angel whose height was 24 shonoi, which make 96 miles, and whose breadth is 4 shonoi, and from shoulder to shoulder 6 shonoi. And the tracks of his feet extend to the length of 3.5 shonoi, which are equal to 14 miles, while the breadth is 1 shonos and a half, and the height half a shonos. And he alleges that also there is a female with him, whose measurement, he says, is according to the standards already mentioned. And he asserts that the male, angel, is son of God, but that the female is called Holy Spirit. By detailing these prodigies he imagines that he confounds fools, while at the same time he utters the following sentence: that there was preached unto men a new remission of sins in the 3rd year of Trajan's reign. And Elchasai determines the nature of baptism, and even this I shall explain. He alleges, as to those who have been involved in every description of lasciviousness and filthiness, and in acts of wickedness, if only any of them be a believer, that he determines that such a one, on being converted, and obeying the book, and believing its contents, should by baptism receive remission of sins. Elchasai, however, ventured to continue these knaveries, taking occasion from the aforesaid tenet of which Calixtus stood forward as a champion. For, perceiving that many were delighted at this sort of promise, he considered that he could opportunely make the attempt just alluded to. And notwithstanding we offered resistance to this, and did not permit many for any length of time to become victims of the delusion. For we carried conviction to the people, when we affirmed that this was the operation of a spurious spirit, and the invention of a heart inflated with pride, and that this one like a wolf had risen up against many wandering sheep, which Calixtus, by his arts of deception, had scattered abroad. But since we have commenced, we shall not be silent as regards the opinions of this man. And, in the first place, we shall expose his life, and we shall prove that his supposed discipline is a mere pretense. And next, I shall adduce the principal heads of his assertions, in order that the reader, looking fixedly on the treatises of this Elchasai, may be made aware what and what sort is the heresy which has been audaciously attempted by this man. This Elchasai puts forward as a decoy a polity, authorized in the law, alleging that believers ought to be circumcised and live according to the law, while at the same time, he forcibly rends certain fragments from the aforesaid heresies. And he asserts that Christ was born a man in the same way as common to all, and that Christ was not for the first time on earth when born of a virgin, but that both previously and that frequently again he had been born and would be born. Christ would thus appear and exist among us from time to time, undergoing alterations of birth, and having his soul transferred from body to body. Now Elchasai adopted that tenet of Pythagoras to which I have already alluded. But the Elchasite have reached such an altitude of pride, that even they affirm themselves to be endued with a power of foretelling futurity, using as a starting point, obviously, the measures and numbers of the aforesaid Pythagorean art. These also devote themselves to the tenets of mathematicians, and astrologers, and magicians, as if they were true. And they resort to these, so as to confuse silly people, thus led to suppose that the heretics participate in a doctrine of power. And they teach certain incantations and formularies for those who have been bitten by dogs, and possessed of demons, and seized with other diseases. And we shall not be silent respecting even such practices of these heretics. Having then sufficiently explained their principles, and the causes of their presumptuous attempts, I shall pass on to give an account of their writings, through which my readers will become acquainted with both the trifling and godless efforts of these Elchasite. To those, then, that have been orally instructed by him, he dispenses baptism in this manner, addressing to his dupes some such words as the following: If, therefore, my children, one shall have intercourse with any sort of animal whatsoever, or a male, or a sister, or a daughter, or hath committed adultery, or been guilty of fornication, and is desirous of obtaining remission of sins, from the moment that he hearkens to this book let him be baptized a second time in the name of the great and most high God, and in the name of his Son, the mighty King. And by baptism let him be purified and cleansed, and let him adjure for himself those 7 witnesses that have been described in this book, the heaven, and the water, and the Holy Spirits, and the angels of prayer, and the oil, and the salt, and the earth. These constitute the astonishing mysteries of Elkasai, those ineffable and potent secrets which he delivers to deserving disciples. And with these that lawless one is not satisfied, but in the presence of 2 and 3 witnesses he puts the seal to his own wicked practices. Again expressing himself thus, "Again I say, O adulterers and adulteresses, and false prophets, if you are desirous of being converted, that your sins may be forgiven you, as soon as ever you hearken unto this book, and be baptized a second time along with your garments, shall peace be yours, and your portion with the just." But since we have stated that these resort to incantations for those bitten by dogs and for other mishaps, we shall explain these. Now Elkasai uses the following formulary. If a dog rabid and furious, in which inheres a spirit of destruction, bite any man, or woman, or youth, or girl, or may worry or touch them, in the same hour let such a one run with all their wearing apparel, and go down to a river or to a fountain wherever there is a deep spot. Let him or her be dipped with all their wearing apparel, and offer supplication to the great and most high God in faith of heart. And then let him thus adjure the 7 witnesses described in this book. Behold, I call to witness the heaven and the water, and the Holy Spirits, and the angels of prayer, and the oil, and the salt, and the earth. I testify by these 7 witnesses that no more shall I sin, nor commit adultery, nor steal, nor be guilty of injustice, nor be covetous, nor be actuated by hatred, nor be scornful, nor shall I take pleasure in any wicked deeds. Having uttered, therefore, these words, let such a one be baptized with the entire of his wearing apparel in the name of the mighty and most high God. But in very many other respects he talks folly, inculcating the use of these sentences also for those afflicted with consumption, and that they should be dipped in cold water 40 times during 7 days, and he prescribes similar treatment for those possessed of devils. O inimitable wisdom and incantations gorged with powers! Who will not be astonished at such and such force of words? But since we have stated that they also bring into requisition astrological deceit, we shall prove this from their own formularies. For Elkasai speaks thus, there exist wicked stars of impiety. This declaration has been now made by us, O ye pious ones and disciples. Beware of the power of the days of the sovereignty of these stars, and engage not in the commencement of any undertaking during the ruling days of these. And baptize not man or woman during the days of the power of these stars, when the moon, emerging from among them, courses the sky, and travels along with them. Beware of the very day up to that on which the moon passes out from these stars, and then baptize and enter on every beginning of your works. But, moreover, honor the day of the Sabbath, since that day is one of those during which prevails the power of these stars. Take care, however, not to commence your works the 3rd day from a Sabbath, since when 3 years of the reign of the Emperor Trojan are again completed from the time that he subjected the Parthians to his own sway, when, I say, 3 years have been completed, war rages between the impious angels of the northern constellations, and on this account all kingdoms of impiety are in a state of confusion. Inasmuch as, Elkasai, considers, then, that it would be an insult to reason that these mighty and ineffable mysteries should be trampled under foot, or that they should be committed to many, he advises that as valuable pearls they should be preserved, expressing himself thus, do not recite this account to all men, and guard carefully these precepts, because all men are not faithful, nor are all women straightforward. Books containing these tenets, however, neither the wise men of the Egyptians secreted in shrines, nor did Pythagoras, a sage of the Greeks, conceal them there. For if at that time Elkasai had happened to live, what necessity would there be that Pythagoras, or Thales, or Solon, or the wise Plato, or even the rest of the sages of the Greeks, should become disciples of the Egyptian priests, when they could obtain possession of such and such wisdom from Alcibiades, as the most astonishing interpreter of that wretched Elkasai? The statements, therefore, that have been made for the purpose of attaining a knowledge of the madness of these, would seem sufficient for those endued with sound mind. And so it is, that it has not appeared expedient to quote more of their formularies, seeing that these are very numerous and ridiculous. Since, however, we have not omitted those practices that have risen up in our own day, and have not been silent as regards those prevalent before our time, it seems proper, in order that we may pass through all their systems, and leave nothing untold, to state what also are the customs of the Jews, and what are the diversities of opinion among them, for I imagine that these as yet remain behind for our consideration. Now, when I have broken silence on these points, I shall pass on to the demonstration of the doctrine of the truth, in order that, after the lengthened argumentative struggle against all heresies, we, devoutly pressing forward towards the kingdom's crown, and believing the truth, may not be unsettled. Originally there prevailed but one usage among the Jews, for one teacher was given unto them by God, namely Moses, and one law by this same Moses. And there was one desert region and one Mount Sinai, for one God it was who legislated for these Jews. But, again, after they had crossed the river Jordan, and had inherited by lot the conquered country, they in various ways rent in sunder the law of God, each devising a different interpretation of the declarations made by God. And in this way they raised up for themselves teachers, and invented doctrines of an heretical nature, and they continued to advance into sectarian divisions. Now it is the diversity of these Jews that I at present propose to explain. But though for even a considerable time they have been rent into very numerous sects, yet I intend to elucidate the more principal of them, while those who are of a studious turn will easily become acquainted with the rest. For there is a division amongst them into three sorts, and the adherents of the first are the Pharisees, but of the second the Sadducees, while the rest are Essenes. These practice a more devotional life, being filled with mutual love, and being temperate. And they turn away from every act of inordinate desire, being averse even to hearing of things of the sort. And they renounce matrimony, but they take the boys of others, and thus have an offspring begotten for them. And they lead these adopted children into an observance of their own peculiar customs, and in this way bring them up and impel them to learn the sciences. They do not, however, forbid them to marry, though themselves refraining from matrimony. Women, however, even though they may be disposed to adhere to the same course of life, they do not admit, inasmuch as in no way whatsoever have they confidence in women. And they despise wealth, and do not turn away from sharing their goods with those that are destitute. No one amongst them, however, enjoys a greater amount of riches than another. For a regulation with them is, that an individual coming forward to join the sect must sell his possessions, and present the price of them to the community. And on receiving the money, the head of the order distributes it to all according to their necessities. Thus there is no one among them in distress. And they do not use oil, regarding it as a defilement to be anointed. And there are appointed overseers, who take care of all things that belong to them in common, and they all appear always in white clothing. But there is not one city of them, but many of them settle in every city. And if any of the adherents of the sect may be present from a strange place, they consider that all things are in common for him, and those whom they had not previously known they receive as if they belonged to their own household and kindred. And they traverse their native land, and on each occasion that they go on a journey they carry nothing except arms. And they have also in their cities a president, who expends the monies collected for this purpose in procuring clothing and food for them. And their robe and its shape are modest. And they do not own 2 cloaks, or a double set of shoes. And when those that are in present use become antiquated, then they adopt others. And they neither buy nor sell anything at all. But whatever anyone has he gives to him that has not, and that which one has not he receives. And they continue in an orderly manner, and with perseverance pray from early dawn. And they do not speak a word unless they have praised God in a hymn. And in this way they each go forth and engage in whatever employment they please, and after having worked up to the 5th hour they leave off. Then again they come together into one place, and encircle themselves with linen girdles, for the purpose of concealing their private parts. And in this manner they perform ablutions in cold water. And after being thus cleansed, they repair together into one apartment. Now no one who entertains a different opinion from themselves assembles in the house, and they proceed to partake of breakfast. And when they have taken their seats in silence, they set down loaves in order, and next some one sort of food to eat along with the bread, and each receives from these a sufficient portion. No one, however, tastes these before the priest utters a blessing, and prays over the food. And after breakfast, when he has a second time offered up supplication, as at the beginning, so at the conclusion of their meal they praise God in hymns. Next, after they have laid aside as sacred the garments in which they have been clothed while together taking their repast within the house. Now these garments are linen. and having resumed the clothes which they had left in the vestibule, they hastened to agreeable occupations until evening. And they partake of supper, doing all things in like manner to those already mentioned. And no one will at any time cry aloud, nor will any other tumultuous voice be heard. But they each converse quietly, and with decorum one conceives the conversation to the other, so that the stillness of those within the house appears a sort of mystery to those outside. And they are invariably sober, eating and drinking all things by measure. All then pay attention to the president, and whatever injunctions he will issue, they obey as law. For they are anxious that mercy and assistance be extended to those that are burdened with toil. And especially they abstain from wrath and anger, and all such passions, inasmuch as they consider these to be treacherous to man. And no one amongst them is in the habit of swearing. But whatever anyone says, this is regarded more binding than an oath. If, however, one will swear, he is condemned as one unworthy of credence. They are likewise solicitous about the readings of the law and prophets, and moreover also, if there is any treatise of the faithful, about that likewise. And they evince the utmost curiosity concerning plants and stones, rather busying themselves as regards the operative powers of these, saying that these things were not created in vain. But to those who wish to become disciples of the sect, they do not immediately deliver their rules, unless they have previously tried them. Now for the space of a year they set before the candidates the same food, while the latter continue to live in a different house outside the Essenes' own place of meeting. And they give, to the probationists, a hatchet and the linen girdle and a white robe. When, at the expiration of this period, one affords proof of self-control, he approaches nearer to the sect's method of living, and he is washed more purely than before. Not as yet, however, does he partake of food along with the Essenes. For, after having furnished evidence as to whether he is able to acquire self-control, but for 2 years the habit of a person of this description is on trial, and when he has appeared deserving, he is thus reckoned amongst the members of the sect. Previous, however, to his being allowed to partake of a repast along with them, he is bound under fearful oaths. First, that he will worship the divinity. Next, that he will observe just dealings with men, and that he will in no way injure anyone, and that he will not hate a person who injures him, or is hostile to him, but pray for them. He likewise swears that he will always aid the just, and keep faith with all, especially those who are rulers. For, they argue, a position of authority does not happen to anyone without God. And if the Essene himself be a ruler, he swears that he will not conduct himself at any time arrogantly in the exercise of power, nor be prodigal, nor resort to any adornment, or a greater state of magnificence than the usage permits. He likewise swears, however, to be a lover of truth, and to reprove him that is guilty of falsehood, neither to steal, nor pollute his conscience for the sake of iniquitous gain, nor conceal aught from those that are members of his sect, and to divulge nothing to others, though one should be tortured even unto death. And in addition to the foregoing promises, he swears to impart to no one a knowledge of the doctrines in a different manner from that in which he has received them himself. With oaths, then, of this description, they bind those who come forward. If, however, any one may be condemned for any sin, he is expelled from the order, but one that has been thus excommunicated sometimes perishes by an awful death. For, inasmuch as he is bound by the oaths and rites of the sect, he is not able to partake of the food in use among other people. Those that are excommunicated, occasionally, therefore, utterly destroy the body through starvation. And so it is, that when it comes to the last the Essenes sometimes pity many of them who are at the point of dissolution, inasmuch as they deem a punishment even unto death, thus inflicted upon these culprits, a sufficient penalty. But as regards judicial decisions, the Essenes are most accurate and impartial. And they deliver their judgments when they have assembled together, numbering at the very least 100, and the sentence delivered by them is irreversible. And they honor the legislator next after God. And if anyone is guilty of blasphemy against this framer of laws, he is punished. And they are taught to yield obedience to rulers and elders, and if 10 occupy seats in the same room, one of them will not speak unless it will appear expedient to the 9. And they are careful not to spit out into the midst of persons present, and to the right hand. They are more solicitous, however, about abstaining from work on the Sabbath day than all other Jews. For not only do they prepare their victuals for themselves one day previously, so as not, on the Sabbath, to kindle a fire, but not even would they move a utensil from one place to another, on that day. Nor ease nature. Nay, some would not even rise from a couch. On other days, however, when they wish to relieve nature, They dig a hole a foot long with the mattock, for of this description is the hatchet, which the president in the first instance gives those who come forward to gain admission as disciples, and cover this cavity on all sides with their garment, alleging that they do not necessarily insult the sunbeams. They then replace the upturned soil into the pit, and this is their practice, choosing the more lonely spots. But after they have performed this operation, immediately they undergo ablution, as if the excrement pollutes them. The Essenes have, however, in the lapse of time, undergone divisions, and they do not preserve their system of training after a similar manner, inasmuch as they have been split up into 4 parties. For some of them discipline themselves above the requisite rules of the order, so that even they would not handle a current coin of the country, saying that they ought not either to carry, or behold, or fashion an image. Wherefore no one of those goes into a city, lest, by so doing, he should enter through a gate at which statues are erected, regarding it a violation of law to pass beneath images. But the adherents of another party, if they happen to hear any one maintaining a discussion concerning God and his laws, supposing such to be an uncircumcised person, they will closely watch him, and when they meet a person of this description in any place alone, they will threaten to slay him if he refuses to undergo the rite of circumcision. Now, if the latter does not wish to comply with this request, an Essene spares not, but even slaughters. And it is from this occurrence that they have received their appellation, being denominated, by some, Zelotae, but by others Sicari. And the adherents of another party call no one Lord except the deity, even though one should put them to the torture, or even kill them. But there are others of a later period, who have to such an extent declined from the discipline of the order, that, as far as those are concerned who continue in the primitive customs, they would not even touch these. And if they happen to come in contact with them, they immediately resort to ablution, as if they had touched one belonging to an alien tribe. But here also there are very many of them of so great longevity, as even to live longer than 100 years. They assert, therefore, that a cause of this arises from their extreme devotion to religion, and their condemnation of all excess in regard of what is served up as food, and from their being temperate and incapable of anger. And so it is that they despise death, rejoicing when they can finish their course with a good conscience. If, however, any one would even put to the torture persons of this description, in order to induce any amongst them either to speak evil of the law, or eat what is offered in sacrifice to an idol, he will not effect his purpose, for one of this party submits to death and endures torment rather than violate his conscience. Now the doctrine of the resurrection has also derived support among these. For they acknowledge both that the flesh will rise again, and that it will be immortal, in the same manner as the soul is already imperishable. And they maintain that the soul, when separated in the present life, departs into one place, which is well ventilated and lightsome, where, they say, it rests until judgment. And this locality the Greeks were acquainted with by hearsay, and called it, Isles of the Blessed. And there are other tenets of these which many of the Greeks have appropriated, and thus have from time to time formed their own opinions. For the disciplinary system in regard of the divinity, according to these, Jewish sects, is of greater antiquity than that of all nations. And so it is that the proof is at hand, that all those, Greeks, who ventured to make assertions concerning God, or concerning the creation of existing things, derived their principles from no other source than from Jewish legislation. And among these may be particularized Pythagoras especially, and the Stoics, who derived their systems, while resident among the Egyptians, by having become disciples of these Jews. Now they affirm that there will be both a judgment and a conflagration of the universe, and that the wicked will be eternally punished. And among them is cultivated the practice of prophecy, and the prediction of future events. There is then another order of the Essenes who use the same customs and prescribed method of living with the foregoing sects, but make an alteration from these in one respect, viz. Marriage. Now they maintain that those who have abrogated matrimony commit some terrible offense, which is for the destruction of life, and that they ought not to cut off the succession of children. For, that if all entertained this opinion, the entire race of men would easily be exterminated. However, they make a trial of their betrothed women for a period of 3 years, and when they have been 3 times purified, with a view of proving their ability of bringing forth children, so then they wed. They do not, however, cohabit with pregnant women, evincing that they marry not from sensual motives, but from the advantage of children. And the women likewise undergo ablution in a similar manner, with their husbands, and are themselves also arrayed in a linen garment, after the mode in which the men are with their girdles. These things, then, are the statements which I have to make respecting the Esseni. But there are also others who themselves practice the Jewish customs. And these, both in respect of caste and in respect of the laws, are called Pharisees. Now the greatest part of these is to be found in every locality, inasmuch as, though all are styled Jews, yet, on account of the peculiarity of the opinions advanced by them, they have been denominated by titles proper to each. These, then, firmly hold the ancient tradition, and continue to pursue in a disputative spirit a close investigation into the things regarded according to the law as clean and not clean. And they interpret the regulations of the law, and put forward teachers, whom they qualify for giving instruction in such things. These Pharisees affirm the existence of fate, and that some things are in our power, whereas others are under the control of destiny. In this way they maintain that some actions depend upon ourselves, whereas others upon fate. But, they assert, that God is a cause of all things, and that nothing is managed or happens without his will. These likewise acknowledge that there is a resurrection of flesh, and that soul is immortal, and that there will be a judgment and conflagration, and that the righteous will be imperishable, but that the wicked will endure everlasting punishment in unquenchable fire. These, then, are the opinions even of the Pharisees. The Sadducees, however, are for abolishing fate, and they acknowledge that God does nothing that is wicked, nor exercises providence over earthly concerns. But they contend that the choice between good and evil lies within the power of men. And they deny that there is a resurrection not only of flesh, but also they suppose that the soul does not continue after death. The soul they consider nothing but mere vitality, and that it is on account of this that man has been created. However, they maintain, that the notion of the resurrection has been fully realized by the single circumstance, that we close our days after having left children upon earth. But, they still insist, that after death one expects to suffer nothing, either bad or good, for that there will be a dissolution both of soul and body, and that man passes into non-existence, similarly also with the material of the animal creation. But as regards whatever wickedness a man may have committed in life, provided he may have been reconciled to the injured party, he has been a gainer, by transgression, inasmuch as he has escaped the punishment that otherwise would have been inflicted, by men. And whatever acquisitions a man may have made, and, in whatever respect, by becoming wealthy, he may have acquired distinction, he has so far been a gainer. But, they abide by their assertion, that God has no solicitude about the concerns of an individual here. And while the Pharisees are full of mutual affection, the Sadducees, on the other hand, are actuated by self-love. This sect had its stronghold especially in the region around Samaria. And these also adhere to the customs of the law, saying that one ought so to live, that he may conduct himself virtuously, and leave children behind him on earth. They do not, however, devote attention to prophets, but neither do they to any other sages, except to the law of Moses only, in regard of which, however, they frame no interpretations. These, then, are the opinions which also the Sadducees choose to teach. Since, therefore, we have explained even the diversities among the Jews, it seems expedient likewise not to pass over in silence the system of their religion. The doctrine, therefore, among all Jews on the subject of religion is fourfold: theological, natural, moral, and ceremonial. And they affirm that there is one God, and that he is creator and Lord of the universe, that he has formed all these glorious works which had no previous existence, and this, too, not out of any coeval substance that lay ready at hand, but his will, the efficient cause, was to create, and he did create. And, they maintain, that there are angels, and that these have been brought into being for ministering unto the creation, but also that there is a sovereign spirit that always continues beside God, for glory and praise. And that all things in the creation are endued with sensation, and that there is nothing inanimate. And they earnestly aim at serious habits and a temperate life, as one may ascertain from their laws. Now these matters have long ago been strictly defined by those who in ancient times have received the divinely appointed law, so that the reader will find himself astonished at the amount of temperance and of diligence lavished on customs legally enacted in reference to man. The ceremonial service, however, which has been adapted to divine worship in a manner befitting the dignity of religion, has been practiced amongst them with the highest degree of elaboration. The superiority of their ritualism it is easy for those who wish it to ascertain, provided they read the book which furnishes information on these points. They will thus perceive how that with solemnity and sanctity the Jewish priests offer unto God the first fruits of the gifts bestowed by him for the use and enjoyment of men. how they fulfill their ministrations with regularity and steadfastness, in obedience to his commandments. There are, however, some liturgical usages adopted by these, which the Sadducees refuse to recognize, for they are not disposed to acquiesce in the existence of angels or spirits. Still all parties alike expect Messiah, inasmuch as the law certainly, and the prophets, preached beforehand that he was about to be present on earth. Inasmuch, however, as the Jews were not cognizant of the period of his advent, there remains the supposition that the declarations of Scripture concerning his coming have not been fulfilled. And so it is, that up to this day they continue in anticipation of the future coming of the Christ, from the fact of their not discerning him when he was present in the world. And, yet there can be little doubt but, that, on beholding the signs of the times of his having been already amongst us, the Jews are troubled, and that they are ashamed to confess that he has come, since they have with their own hands put him to death, because they were stung with indignation and being convicted by himself of not having obeyed the laws. And they affirm that he who was thus sent forth by God is not this Christ, whom they are looking for, but they confess that another Messiah will come, who as yet has no existence, and that he will usher in some of the signs which the law and the prophets have shown beforehand. Whereas, regarding the rest of these indications, they suppose that they have fallen into error. For they say that his generation will be from the stock of David, but not from a virgin and the Holy Spirit, but from a woman and a man, according as it is a rule for all to be procreated from seed. And they allege that this Messiah will be king over them, a warlike and powerful individual, who, after having gathered together the entire people of the Jews, and having done battle with all the nations, will restore for them Jerusalem the royal city. And into this city he will collect together the entire Hebrew race, and bring it back once more into the ancient customs, that it may fulfill the regal and sacerdotal functions, and dwell in confidence for periods of time of sufficient duration. After this repose, it is their opinion that war would next be waged against them after being thus congregated, that in this conflict Christ would fall by the edge of the sword, and that, after no long time, would next succeed the termination and conflagration of the universe, and that in this way their opinions concerning the resurrection would receive completion, and a recompense be rendered to each man according to his works. It now seems to us that the tenets of both all the Greeks and barbarians have been sufficiently explained by us, and that nothing has remained unrefuted either of the points about which philosophy has been busied, or of the allegations advanced by the heretics. And from these very explanations the condemnation of the heretics is obvious, for having either purloined their doctrines, or derived contributions to them from some of those tenets elaborately worked out by the Greeks, and for having advanced these opinions, as if they originated from God. Since, therefore, we have hurriedly passed through all the systems of these, and with much labor have, in the 9 books, proclaimed all their opinions, and have left behind us for all men a small viaticum in life, and to those who are our contemporaries have afforded a desire of learning, with great joy and delight, we have considered it reasonable, as a crowning stroke to the entire work, to introduce the discourse, already mentioned, concerning the truth, and to furnish our delineation of this in one book, namely the 10th. Our object is, that the reader, not only when made acquainted with the overthrow of those who have presumed to establish heresies, may regard with scorn their idle fancies, but also, when brought to know the power of the truth, may be placed in the way of salvation, by reposing that faith in God which he so worthily deserves.
And now, please enjoy Book 10 of Hippolytus' Refutation of All Heresies.
The following are the contents of the 10th book of the Refutation of All Heresies. An epitome of all philosophers. An epitome of all heresies. And, in conclusion to all, what the doctrine of the truth is. After we have, not with violence, burst through the labyrinth of heresies, but have unravelled their intricacies, through a refutation merely, or, in other words, by the force of truth, we approach the demonstration of the truth itself. For then the artificial sophisms of error will be exposed in all their inconsistency, when we shall succeed in establishing whence it is that the definition of the truth has been derived. The truth has not taken its principles from the wisdom of the Greeks, nor borrowed its doctrines, as secret mysteries, from the tenets of the Egyptians, which, albeit silly, are regarded amongst them with religious veneration as worthy of reliance. Nor has it been formed out of the fallacies which enunciate the incoherent conclusions arrived at through the curiosity of the Chaldeans. Nor does the truth owe its existence to astonishment, through the operations of demons, for the irrational frenzy of the Babylonians. But its definition is constituted after the manner in which every true definition is, viz. as simple and unadorned. A definition such as this, provided it is made manifest, will of itself refute error. And although we have very frequently propounded demonstrations, and with sufficient fullness elucidated for those willing to learn the rule of the truth, yet even now, after having discussed all the opinions put forward by the Greeks and heretics, we have decided it not to be, at all events, unreasonable to introduce, as a sort of finishing stroke to the 9 books preceding this demonstration throughout the 10th book. Having, therefore, embraced a consideration of the tenets of all the wise men among the Greeks in 4 books, and the doctrines propounded by the heresiarchs in 5, we shall now exhibit the doctrine concerning the truth in 1, having first presented in a summary the suppositions entertained severally by all. For the dogmatists of the Greeks, dividing philosophy into 3 parts, in this manner devised from time to time their speculative systems, some denominating their system natural, and others moral, but others dialectical philosophy. And the ancient thinkers who called their science natural philosophy, were those mentioned in Book I. And the account which they furnished was after this mode. Some of them derived all things from one, whereas others from more things than one. And of those who derived all things from one, some derived them from what was devoid of quality, whereas others from what was endued with quality. And among those who derived all things from quality, some derived them from fire, and some from air, and some from water, and some from earth. And among those who derived the universe from more things than one, some derived it from numerable, but others from infinite quantities. And among those who derived all things from numerable quantities, some derived them from 2, and others from 4, and others from 5, and others from 6. And among those who derived the universe from infinite quantities, some derived entities from things similar to those generated, whereas others from things dissimilar. And among these some derived entities from things incapable of, whereas others from things capable of, passion. From a body devoid of quality and endued with unity, the Stoics, then, accounted for the generation of the universe. For, according to them, matter devoid of quality, and in all its parts susceptible of change, constitutes an originating principle of the universe. For, when an alteration of this ensues, there is generated fire, air, water, earth. The followers, however, of Hippolytus and Anaximander and Thales the Milesian, are disposed to think that all things have been generated from one, an entity, endued with quality. Hippolytus of Metapontum and Heraclitus the Ephesian declared the origin of things to be from fire, whereas Anaximander from air, but Thales from water, and Xenophanes from earth. For from earth, says he, are all things, and all things terminate in the earth. But among those who derive all entities from more things than one, and from numerable quantities, the poet Homer asserts that the universe consists of 2 substances, namely earth and water, at one time expressing himself thus: "The source of gods was sea and mother earth," and on another occasion thus: "But indeed ye all might become water and earth." And Xenophanes of Colophon seems to coincide with him, for he says, "We all are sprung from water and from earth." Euripides, however, derives the universe, from earth and air, as one may ascertain from the following assertion of his: "Mother of all, air and earth, I sing." But Empedocles derives the universe from 4 principles, expressing himself thus: "4 roots of all things hear thou first. Brilliant Jove, and life-giving Juno and Adoneus. And Nestes, that with tears bedews the mortal font." Ocellus, however, the Lucanian and Aristotle, derive the universe from 5 principles. For, along with the 4 elements, they have assumed the existence of a 5th, and, that this is, a body with a circular motion. And they say that from this, things celestial have their being. But the disciples of Empedocles supposed the generation of the universe to have proceeded from 6 principles. For in the passage where he says, "4 roots of all things hear thou first," he produces generation out of 4 principles. When, however, he subjoins, "Ruinous strife apart from these, equal in every point. And with them friendship equal in length and breadth." He also delivers 6 principles of the universe, 4 of them material, earth, water, fire, and air, but 2 of them formative, friendship and discord. The followers, however, of Anaxagoras of Clazomenae, and of Democritus, and of Epicurus, and multitudes of others, have given it as their opinion that the generation of the universe proceeds from infinite numbers of atoms, and we have previously made partial mention of these philosophers. But Anaxagoras derives the universe from things similar to those that are being produced, whereas the followers of Democritus and Epicurus derived the universe from things both dissimilar, to the entities produced, and devoid of passion, that is, from atoms. But the followers of Heraclides of Pontus, and of Asclepiades, derived the universe from things dissimilar, to the entities produced, and capable of passion, as if from incongruous corpuscles. But the disciples of Plato affirm that these entities are from three principles: God, and matter, and exemplar. He divides matter, however, into four principles: fire, water, earth, and air. And, he says, that God is the creator of this matter, and that mind is its exemplar. Persuaded, then, that the principle of physiology is confessedly discovered to be encumbered with difficulties for all these philosophers, we ourselves also shall fearlessly declare concerning the examples of the truth, as to how they are, and as we have felt confident that they are. But we shall previously furnish an explanation, in the way of epitome, of the tenets of the heresiarchs, in order that, by our having set before our readers the tenets of all made well known by this plan of treatment, we may exhibit the truth in a plain and familiar form. But since it so appears expedient, let us begin first from the public worshippers of the serpent. The Gnocini call the first principle of the universe a man, and that the same also is a son of man, and they divide this man into three portions. For they say one part of him is rational, and another psychical, but a third earthly. And they style him Adamas, and suppose that the knowledge appertaining to him is the originating cause of the capacity of knowing God. And the Gnocine asserts that all these rational, and psychical, and earthly qualities have retired into Jesus, and that through him these three substances simultaneously have spoken unto the three genera of the universe. These allege that there are three kinds of existence: angelic, psychical, and earthly, and that there are three churches: angelic, psychical, and earthly, and that the names for these are chosen, called, and captive. These are the heads of doctrine advanced by them, as far as one may briefly comprehend them. They affirm that James, the brother of the Lord, delivered these tenets to Mariamne, by such a statement belying both. The Parete, however, viz. Ademes the Charistian, and Euphrates the Peratic, say that there is some one world. This is the denomination they use, and affirming that it is divided into three parts. But of the threefold division, according to them, there is one principle, just like an immense fountain, capable of being by reason divided into infinite segments. And the first segment, and the one of more proximity, according to them, is the triad, and is called a perfect good, and a paternal magnitude. But the second portion of the triad is a certain multitude of, as it were, infinite powers. The third part, however, is formal. And the first is unbegotten. Whence they expressly affirm that there are three gods, three logoi, three minds, and three men. For when the division has been accomplished, to each part of the world they assign both gods, and logoi, and men, and the rest. But from above, from uncreatedness and the first segment of the world, when afterwards the world had attained to its consummation, the Peratic affirms that there came down, in the times of Herod, a certain man with a threefold nature, and a threefold body, and a threefold power, named Christ, and that he possesses from the three parts of the world in himself all the concretions and capacities of the world. And they are disposed to think that this is what has been declared, in whom dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And they assert that from the two worlds situated above, namely, both the unbegotten one and self-begotten one, there were born down into this world in which we are, germs of all sorts of powers. And, they say, that Christ came down from above from uncreatedness, in order that, by his descent, all things that have been divided into three parts may be saved. For, says the Peratic, the things that have been borne down from above will ascend through him. And the things that have plotted against those that have been borne down are heedlessly rejected, and sent away to be punished. And the Peratic states that there are two parts which are saved. That is, those that are situated above, by having been separated from corruption, and that the third is destroyed, which he calls a formal world. These also are the tenets of the Parete. But to the Sethians it seems that there exist three principles, which have been precisely defined. And each of the principles is fitted by nature for being able to be generated, as in a human soul every art whatsoever is developed which is capable of being learned. The result is the same as when a child, by being long conversant with a musical instrument, becomes a musician, or with geometry a geometrician, or with any other art, with a similar result. And the essences of the principles, the Sethians say, are light and darkness. And in the midst of these is pure spirit. And the spirit, they say, is that which is placed intermediate between darkness, which is below, and light, which is above. It is not spirit, as a current of wind or a certain gentle breeze which may be felt, but just as if some fragrance of ointment or incense made out of a refined mixture, a power diffusing itself by some impulse of fragrance which is inconceivable and superior to what one can express. Since, therefore, the light is above and the darkness below, and the spirit is intermediate between these, the light, also, as a ray of sun, shines from above on the underlying darkness. And the fragrance of the spirit is wafted onwards, occupying an intermediate position, and proceeds forth, just as is diffused the odor of incense offerings, laid upon the fire. Now the power of the things divided threefold being of this description. The power simultaneously of the spirit and of the light is below, in the darkness that is situated beneath. The darkness, however, they say, is a horrible water, into which the light along with the spirit is absorbed, and thus translated into a nature of this description. The darkness being then endued with intelligence, and knowing that when the light has been removed from it the darkness continues desolate, devoid of radiance and splendor, power and efficiency, as well as impotent, therefore, by every effort of reflection and of reason, this makes an exertion to comprise in itself brilliancy, and a scintillation of light, along with the fragrance of the spirit. And of this they introduce the following image, expressing themselves thus: just as the pupil of the eye appears dark beneath the underlying humors, but is illuminated by the Spirit, so the darkness earnestly strives after the Spirit, and has with itself all the powers which wish to retire and return. Now these are indefinitely infinite, from which, when commingled, all things are figured and generated like seals. For just as a seal, when brought into contact with wax, produces a figure, and yet the seal itself remains of itself what it was, so also the powers, by coming into communion, one with the other, form all the infinite kinds of animals. The Sethians assert that, therefore, from the primary concourse of the three principles was generated an image of the Great Seal, namely heaven and earth, having a form like a womb, possessing a navel in the midst. And so that the rest of the figures of all things were, like heaven and earth, fashioned similar to a womb. And the Sethians say that from the water was produced a first-begotten principle, namely a vehement and boisterous wind, and that it is a cause of all generation, which creates a sort of heat and motion in the world from the motion of the waters. And they maintain that this wind is fashioned like the hissing of a serpent into a perfect image. And on this the world gazes and hurries into generation, being inflamed as a womb, and from thence they are disposed to think that the generation of the universe has arisen. And they say that this wind constitutes a spirit, and that a perfect God has arisen from the fragrance of the waters, and that of the spirit, and from the brilliant light. And they affirm that mind exists after the mode of generation from a female, meaning by mind, the supernal spark, and that, having been mingled beneath with the compounds of body, it earnestly desires to flee away, that escaping it may depart and not find dissolution on account of the deficiency in the waters. Wherefore it is in the habit of crying aloud from the mixture of the waters, according to the psalmist, as they say, for the entire anxiety of the light above us, that it may deliver the spark which is below from the Father beneath, that is, from wind. And the Father creates heat and disturbance, and produces for himself a son, namely mind, which, as they allege, is not the peculiar offspring of himself. And these heretics affirm that the Son, on beholding the perfect logos of the supernal light, underwent a transformation, and in the shape of a serpent entered into a womb, in order that he might be able to recover that mind which is the scintillation from the light. And that this is what has been declared, who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant. And the wretched and baneful Sethians are disposed to think that this constitutes the servile form alluded to by the Apostle. These, then, are the assertions which likewise these Sethians advance. But that very sapient fellow Simon makes his statement thus, that there is an indefinite power, and that this is the root of the universe. And this indefinite power, he says, which is fire, is in itself not anything which is simple, as the gross bulk of speculators maintain, when they assert that there are four incomposite elements, and have supposed fire, as one of these, to be uncompounded. Simon, on the other hand, alleges that the nature of fire is twofold, and one portion of this twofold nature he calls a something secret, and another, a something manifest. And he asserts that the secret is concealed in the manifest parts of the fire, and that the manifest parts of the fire have been produced from the secret. And he says that all the parts of the fire, visible and invisible, have been supposed to be in possession of a capacity of perception. The world, therefore, he says, that is begotten, has been produced from the unbegotten fire. And it commenced, he says, to exist thus. The unbegotten one took 6 primal roots of the principle of generation from the principle of that fire. For he maintains that these roots have been generated in pairs from the fire, and these he denominates mind and intelligence, voice and name, ratiocination and reflection. And he asserts that in the 6 roots, at the same time, resides the indefinite power, which he affirms to be him that stood, stands, and will stand. And when this one has been formed into a figure, he will, according to this heretic, exist in the 6 powers substantially and potentially. And he will be in magnitude and perfection one and the same with that unbegotten and indefinite power, possessing no attribute in any respect more deficient than that unbegotten, and unalterable, and indefinite power. If, however, he who stood, stands, and will stand, continues to exist only potentially in the 6 powers, and has not assumed any definite figure, he becomes, says Simon, utterly evanescent, and perishes. And this takes place in the same manner as the grammatical or geometrical capacity, which, though it has been implanted in man's soul, suffers extinction when it does not obtain the assistance of a master of either of these arts, who would indoctrinate that soul into its principles. Now Simon affirms that he himself is he who stood, stands, and will stand, and that he is a power that is above all things. So far, then, for the opinions of Simon likewise. Valentinus, however, and the adherents of this school, though they agree in asserting that the originating principle of the universe is the Father, still they are impelled into the adoption of a contrary opinion respecting him. For some of them maintain that the Father is solitary and generative, whereas others hold the impossibility, in his as in other cases, of procreation without a female. They therefore add Sige as the spouse of this Father, and style the Father himself Bythus. From this Father and his spouse some allege that there have been 6 projections, viz. Nous and Aletheia, Logos and Zoe, Anthropos and Ecclesia, and that this constitutes the procreative Ogdoad. And the Valentinians maintain that those are the first projections which have taken place within the limit, and have been again denominated, those within the pleroma, and the second are, those without the pleroma, and the third, those without the limit. Now the generation of these constitutes the hysterema achamoth. And he asserts that what has been generated from an eon, that exists in the hysterema and has been projected, beyond the limit, is the Creator. But Valentinus is not disposed to affirm what is thus generated to be primal deity, but speaks in detractive terms both of him and the things made by him. And, he asserts, that Christ came down from within the pleroma for the salvation of the spirit who had erred. This spirit, according to the Valentinians, resides in our inner man, and they say that this inner man obtains salvation on account of this indwelling spirit. Valentinus, however, to uphold the doctrine, determines that the flesh is not saved, and styles it, a leathern tunic, and the perishable portion of man. I have, already, declared these tenets in the way of an epitome, inasmuch as in their systems there exists enlarged matter for discussion, and a variety of opinions. In this manner, then, it seems proper also to the school of Valentinus to propound their opinions. But Basilides also himself affirms that there is a non-existent God, who, being non-existent, has made the non-existent world, that has been formed out of things that are not, by casting down a certain seed, as it were a grain of mustard seed, having in itself stem, leaves, branches, and fruit. Or this seed is as a peacock's egg, comprising in itself the varied multitude of colors. And this, say the Basilidians, constitutes the seed of the world, from which all things have been produced. For they maintain that it comprises in itself all things, as it were those that as yet are non-existent, and which it has been predetermined to be brought into existence by the non-existent deity. There was, then, he says, in the seed itself a threefold sonship, in all respects of the same substance with the non-existent God, which has been begotten from things that are not. And of this sonship, divided into 3 parts, one portion of it was refined, and another gross, and another requiring purification. The refined portion, when first the earliest putting down of the seed was accomplished by the non-existent God, immediately burst forth, and ascended upwards, and proceeded towards the non-existent deity. For every nature yearns after that God on account of the excess of his beauty, but different creatures desire him, from different causes. The more gross portion, however, still continues in the seed, and inasmuch as it is a certain imitative nature, it was not able to soar upwards, for it was more gross than the subtle part. The more gross portion, however, equipped itself with the Holy Spirit, as it were with wings. For the sonship, thus arrayed, shows kindness to this spirit, and in turn receives kindness. The third sonship, however, requires purification, and therefore this continued in the conglomeration of all germs, and this displays and receives kindness. And Basilides asserts that there is something which is called world, and something else, which is called supra-mundane, for entities are distributed by him into two primary divisions. And what is intermediate between these he calls conter Holy Spirit, and this Spirit has in itself the fragrance of the sonship. From the conglomeration of all germs of the cosmical seed burst forth and was begotten the great Archon, the head of the world, an aeon of inexpressible beauty and size. This Archon, having raised himself as far as the firmament, supposed that there was not another above himself. And accordingly he became more brilliant and powerful than all the underlying aeons, with the exception of the sonship that had been left beneath, but which he was not aware was more wise than himself. This one, having his attention turned to the creation of the world, first begat a son unto himself, superior to himself, and this son he caused to sit on his own right hand, and this these Basilidians allege is the Ogdoad. The great Archon himself, then, produces the entire celestial creation. Another Archon ascended from the conglomeration of all the germs, who was greater than all the underlying aeon, except the sonship that had been left behind, yet far inferior to the former one. And they style this second Archon a hebdomad. He is maker and creator, and controller of all things that are beneath him, and this Archon produced for himself a son more prudent and wiser than himself. Now they assert that all these things exist according to the predetermination of that non-existent God, and that there exist also worlds and intervals that are infinite. And the Basilidians affirm that upon Jesus, who was born of Mary, came the power of the gospel, which descended and illuminated the Son both of the Ogdoad and of the hebdomad. And this took place for the purpose of enlightening and distinguishing from the different orders of beings, and purifying the sonship that had been left behind for conferring benefits on souls, and the receiving benefits in turn. And they say that themselves are sons, who are in the world for this cause, that by teaching they may purify souls, and along with the sonship may ascend to the Father above, from whom proceeded the first sonship. And they allege that the world endures until the period when all souls may have repaired thither along with the sonship. These, however, are the opinions which Basilides, who detailed them as prodigies, is not ashamed to advance. But Justinus also himself attempted to establish similar opinions with these, and expresses himself thus: that there are three unbegotten principles of the universe, two males and one female. And of the males one principle is denominated good. Now this alone is called after this mode, and is endued with a foreknowledge of the universe. And the other is father of all generated entities, and is devoid of foreknowledge, and unknown, and invisible, and is called Elohim. The female principle is devoid of foreknowledge, passionate, with two minds, and with two bodies, as we have minutely detailed in the previous discourses concerning this heretic system. This female principle, in her upper parts, as far as the groin, is, the Justinians say, a virgin, whereas from the groin downwards a snake. And such is denominated Edom and Israel. This heretic alleges that these are the principles of the universe, from which all things have been produced. And he asserts that Elohim, without foreknowledge, passed into inordinate desire for the half-virgin, and that having had intercourse with her, he begot 12 angels, and the names of these he states to be those already given. And of these the paternal ones are connected with the father, and the maternal with the mother. And Justinus maintains that these are the trees of paradise, concerning which Moses has spoken in an allegorical sense the things written in the law. And Justinus affirms that all things were made by Elohim and Edom. And he says that animals, with the rest of the creatures of this kind, are from the apart resembling a beast, whereas man from the parts above the groin. And Edom is supposed by Justinus to have deposited in man himself the soul, which was her own power, but Elohim the spirit. And Justinus alleges that this Elohim, after having learned his origin, ascended to the good being and deserted Edom. And this heretic asserts that Edom, enraged on account of such treatment, concocted all this plot against the spirit of Elohim which he deposited in man. And Justinus informs us that for this reason the Father sent Baruch, and issued directions to the prophets, in order that the spirit of Elohim might be delivered, and that all might be seduced away from Edom. But, this heretic, alleges that even Hercules was a prophet, and that he was worsted by Omphale, that is, by Babel, and the Justinians call the latter Venus. And, they say, that afterwards, in the days of Herod, Jesus was born son of Mary and Joseph, to whom he alleges Baruch had spoken. And, Justinus asserts, that Edom plotted against this, Jesus, but could not deceive him, and for this reason, that she caused him to be crucified. And the spirit of Jesus, says Justinus, ascended to the good being. And, the Justinians maintain, that the spirits of all who thus obey those silly and futile discourses will be saved, and that the body and soul of Edom have been left behind. But the foolish Justinus calls this, Edom, earth. Now the Docetae advance assertions of this description. That the primal deity is as a seed of the fig tree, and that from this proceeded 3 eons as the stem, and the leaves and the fruit, and that these projected 30 eons, each, of them, 10, and that they were all united in decades, but differed only in positions, as some were before others. And, the Docetae assert, that infinite eons were indefinitely projected, and that all these were hermaphrodites. And, they say, that these eons formed a design of simultaneously going together into one eon, and that from this the intermediate eon and from the Virgin Mary they begot a Saviour of all. And this Redeemer was like in every respect to the first seed of the fig tree, but inferior in this respect, from the fact of his having been begotten. For the seed whence the fig tree springs is unbegotten. This, then, was the great light of the eons. It was entirely radiance, which receives no adornment, and comprises in itself the forms of all animals. And the Docetae maintain that this light, on proceeding into the underlying chaos, afforded a cause, of existence, to the things that were produced, and those actually existing, and that on coming down from above it impressed on chaos beneath the forms of everlasting species. For the third eon, which had tripled itself, when he perceives that all his characteristic attributes were forcibly drawn off into the nether darkness, and not being ignorant both of the terror of darkness and the simplicity of light, proceeded to create heaven. And after having rendered firm what intervened, he separated the darkness from the light. As all the species of the third eon were, he says, overcome by the darkness, the figure even of this eon became a living fire, having been generated by light. And from this source, they allege, was generated the great Archon, regarding whom Moses converses, saying that he is a fiery deity and demiurge, who also continually alters the forms of all eons into bodies. And the Docetae allege that these are the souls for whose sake the Saviour was begotten, and that he points out the way through which the souls will escape that are, now, overpowered, by darkness. And, the Docetae maintain, that Jesus arrayed himself in that only begotten power, and that for this reason he could not be seen by any, on account of the excessive magnitude of his glory. And they say that all the occurrences took place with him as it has been written in the Gospels. But the followers of Monoamus the Arabian assert that the originating principle of the universe is a primal man and son of man. And that, as Moses states, the things that have been produced were produced not by the primal man, but by the son of that primal man, yet not by the entire son, but by part of him. And, Monoamus asserts, that the son of man is iota, which stands for 10, the principal number in which is, inherent, the subsistence of all number, in general, and, through which every number, in particular, consists, as well as the generation of the universe, fire, air, water, and earth. But inasmuch as this is one iota and one tittle, and what is perfect, emanates, from what is perfect, or, in other words, a tittle flows down from above, containing all things in itself. Therefore, whatsoever things also the man possesses, the Father of the Son of Man possesses likewise. Moses, therefore, says that the world was made in 6 days, that is, by 6 powers, out of which the world was made by the one tittle. For cubes and octahedrons and pyramids, and all figures similar to these, having equal superficies, out of which consist fire, air, water, and earth, have been produced from numbers comprehended in that simple tittle of the iota, which is Son of Man. When, therefore, says Monoamus, Moses mentions the rods being brandished for the purpose of bringing the plagues upon Egypt, he alludes allegorically to the alterations of the world of iota, nor did he frame more than 10 plagues. If, however, says he, you wish to become acquainted with the universe, search within yourself who is it that says, my soul, my flesh, and my mind, and who is it that appropriates each one thing unto himself, as another would do, for himself. Understand that this is a perfect one arising from one that is perfect, and that he considers as his own all so-called nonentities and all entities. These, then, are the opinions of Monoimus also. Tatian, however, similarly with Valentinus and the others, says that there are certain invisible aeons, and that by some one of these the world below has been created, and the things existing in it. And he habituates himself to a very cynical mode of life, and almost in nothing differs from Marcion, as appertaining both to his slanders, and the regulations enacted concerning marriage. But Marcion, of Pontus, and Sardina, his preceptor, themselves also lay down that there are three principles of the universe: good, just, and matter. Some disciples, however, of these add a fourth, saying, good, just, evil, and matter. But they all affirm that the good, being, has made nothing at all, though some denominate the just one likewise evil, whereas others that his only title is that of just. And they allege that, the just being, made all things out of subjacent matter, for that he made them not well, but irrationally. For it is requisite that the things made should be similar to the Maker. Wherefore also they thus employ the evangelical parables, saying, a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, and the rest of the passage. Now Marcion alleges that the conceptions badly devised by the just one himself constituted the illusion in this passage. And, he says, that Christ is the Son of the good being, and was sent for the salvation of souls by him whom he styles the inner than. And he asserts that he appeared as a man though not being a man, and as incarnate though not being incarnate. And he maintains that his manifestation was only phantastic, and that he underwent neither generation nor passion except in appearance. And he will not allow that flesh rises again. But in affirming marriage to be destruction, he leads his disciples towards a very cynical life. And by these means he imagines that he annoys the Creator, if he should abstain from the things that are made or appointed by him. But Apelles, a disciple of this heretic, was displeased at the statements advanced by his preceptor, as we have previously declared, and by another theory supposed that there are four gods. And the first of these he alleges to be the good being, whom the prophets did not know, and Christ to be his Son. And the second God, he affirms to be the Creator of the universe, and him he does not wish to be a God. And the third God, he states to be the fiery one that was manifested, and the fourth to be an evil one. And Apelles calls these angels, and by adding, to their number, Christ likewise, he will assert him to be a fifth God. But this heretic is in the habit of devoting his attention to a book which he calls Revelations of a certain Philumene, whom he considers a prophetess. And he affirms that Christ did not receive his flesh from the Virgin, but from the adjacent substance of the world. In this manner he composed his treatises against the law and the prophets, and attempts to abolish them as if they had spoken falsehoods, and had not known God. And Apelles, similarly with Marcion, affirms that the different sorts of flesh are destroyed. Cerinthus, however, himself having been trained in Egypt, determined that the world was not made by the first God, but by a certain angelic power. And this power was far separated and distant from that sovereignty which is above the entire circle of existence, and it knows not the God, that is, above all things. And he says that Jesus was not born of a virgin, but that he sprang from Joseph and Mary as their son, similar to the rest of men, and that he excelled in justice and prudence, and understanding above all the rest of mankind. And Cerinthus maintains that, after Jesus' baptism, Christ came down in the form of a dove upon him from the sovereignty that is above the whole circle of existence, and that then he proceeded to preach the unknown Father and to work miracles. And he asserts that, at the conclusion of the Passion, Christ flew away from Jesus, but that Jesus suffered, and that Christ remained incapable of suffering, being a Spirit of the Lord. But the Ebionians assert that the world is made by the true God, and they speak of Christ in a similar manner with Cerinthus. They live, however, in all respects according to the law of Moses, alleging that they are thus justified. But Theodotus of Byzantium introduced a heresy of the following description, alleging that all things were created by the true God. Whereas that Christ, he states, in a manner similar to that advocated by the Gnostics already mentioned, made his appearance according to some mode of this description. And Theodotus affirms that Christ is a man of a kindred nature with all men, but that he surpasses them in this respect, that, according to the counsel of God, he had been born of a virgin, and the Holy Ghost had overshadowed his mother. This heretic, however, maintained that Jesus had not assumed flesh in the womb of the Virgin, but that afterwards Christ descended upon Jesus at his baptism in form of a dove. And from this circumstance, the followers of Theodotus affirm that at first miraculous powers did not acquire operating energy in the Saviour himself. Theodotus, however, determines to deny the divinity of Christ. Now, opinions of this description were advanced by Theodotus. And others also make all their assertions similarly with those which have been already specified, introducing one only alteration, viz. in respect of regarding Melchizedek as a certain power. But they allege that Melchizedek himself is superior to all powers, and according to his image, they are desirous of maintaining that Christ likewise is generated. The Phrygians, however, derive the principles of their heresy from a certain Montanus, and Priscilla, and Maximilla, and regard these wretched women as prophetesses, and Montanus as a prophet. In respect, however, of what appertains to the origin and creation of the universe, the Phrygians are supposed to express themselves correctly, while in the tenets which they enunciate respecting Christ, they have not irrelevantly formed their opinions. But they are seduced into error in common with the heretics previously alluded to, and devote their attention to the discourses of these above the Gospels, thus laying down regulations concerning novel and strange fasts. But others of them, being attached to the heresy of the Noetians, entertain similar opinions to those relating to the silly women of the Phrygians, and to Montanus. As regards, however, the truths appertaining to the Father of the entire of existing things, they are guilty of blasphemy, because they assert that he is Son and Father, visible and invisible, begotten and unbegotten, mortal and immortal. These have taken occasion from a certain Noetus to put forward their heresy. But in like manner, also, Noetus, being by birth a native of Smyrna, and a fellow addicted to reckless babbling, as well as crafty withal, introduced, among us, this heresy which originated from one Epigonus. It reached Rome, and was adopted by Cleomenes, and so has continued to this day among his successors. Noetus asserts that there is one Father and God of the universe, and that he made all things, and was imperceptible to those that exist when he might so desire. Noetus maintained that the Father then appeared when he wished, and he is invisible when he is not seen, but visible when he is seen. And this heretic also alleges that the Father is unbegotten when he is not generated, but begotten when he is born of a virgin, as also that he is not subject to suffering, and is immortal when he does not suffer or die. When, however, his passion came upon him, Noetus allows that the Father suffers and dies. And the Noetians suppose that this Father himself is called Son, and vice versa, in reference to the events which at their own proper periods happened to them severally. Calixtus corroborated the heresy of these Noetians, but we have already carefully explained the details of his life. And Calixtus himself produced likewise a heresy, and derived its starting points from these Noetians, namely, so far as he acknowledges that there is one Father and God, viz. the Creator of the universe, and that this, God, is spoken of, and called by the name of Son, yet that in substance he is one Spirit. For Spirit, as the deity, is, he says, not any being different from the Logos, or the Logos from the deity. Therefore this one person, according to Calixtus, is divided nominally, but substantially not so. He supposes this one Logos to be God, and affirms that there was in the case of the Word an incarnation. And he is disposed to maintain that he who was seen in the flesh and was crucified is Son, but that the Father it is who dwells in him. Calixtus thus at one time branches off into the opinion of Noetus, but at another into that of Theodotus, and holds no sure doctrine. These, then, are the opinions of Calixtus. But one Hermogenes himself, also being desirous of saying something, asserted that God made all things out of matter coeval with himself, and subject to his design. For Hermogenes held it to be an impossibility that God should make the things that were made, except out of existent things. But certain others, introducing as it were some novel tenet, appropriated parts of their system from all heresies, and procured a strange volume, which bore on the title page the name of one Elchasai. These, in like manner, acknowledge that the principles of the universe were originated by the deity. They do not, however, confess that there is but one Christ, but that there is one that is superior to the rest, and that he is transfused into many bodies frequently, and was now in Jesus. And, in like manner, these heretics maintain that at one time Christ was begotten of God, and at another time became the Spirit, and at another time was born of a virgin, and at another time not so. And they affirm that likewise this Jesus afterwards was continually being transfused into bodies, and was manifested in many, different bodies, at different times. And they resort to incantations and baptisms in their confession of elements. And they occupy themselves with bustling activity in regard of astrological and mathematical science, and of the arts of sorcery. but also they allege themselves to have powers of prescience. From Haran, a city of Mesopotamia, Abraham, by the command of God, transfers his residence into the country which is now called Palestine and Judea, but then the region of Canaan. Now, concerning this territory, we have in part, but still not negligently, rendered an account in other discourses. From the circumstance, then, of this migration, is traceable the beginning of an increase, of population, in Judea, which obtained its name from Judah, fourth son of Jacob, whose name was also called Israel, from the fact that a race of kings would be descended from him. Abraham removes from Mesopotamia, when 75 years old, and, when 100 years old he begat Isaac. But Isaac, when 60 years of age, begat Jacob. And Jacob, when 86 years old, begat Levi. And Levi, at 40 years of age, begat Koth. And Koth was 4 years of age when he went down with Jacob into Egypt. Therefore the entire period during which Abraham sojourned, and the entire family descended from him by Isaac, in the country then called Canaanitis, was 215 years. But the father of this Abraham is Thare, and of this Thare the father is Nachor, and of this Nachor the father is Serug, and of this Serug the father is Ru, and of this Ru the father is Peleg, and of this Peleg the father is Eber. And so it comes to pass that the Jews are denominated by the name of Hebrews. In the time of Phaleg, however, arose the dispersion of nations. Now these nations were 72, corresponding with the number of Abraham's children. And the names of these nations we have likewise set down in other books, not even omitting this point in its own proper place. And the reason of our particularity is our desire to manifest to those who are of a studious disposition the love which we cherish towards the divinity, and the indubitable knowledge respecting the truth, which in the course of our labors we have acquired possession of. But of this Eber the father is Salah, and of this Salah the father is Canaan, and of this Canaan the father is Arphaxad, whose father is Shem, and of this Shem the father is Noah. And in Noah's time there occurred a flood throughout the entire world, which neither Egyptians, nor Chaldeans, nor Greeks recollect. For the inundations which took place in the age of Ogyges and Deucalion prevailed only in the localities where these dwelt. There are, then, in the case of these, patriarchs, that is, from Noah to Eber inclusive, 5 generations, and 495 years. This Noah, inasmuch as he was a most religious and God-loving man, alone, with wife and children, and the 3 wives of these, escaped the flood that ensued. And he owed his preservation to an ark. And both the dimensions and relics of this ark are, as we have explained, shown to this day in the mountains called Ararat, which are situated in the direction of the country of the Adiabeni. It is then possible for those who are disposed to investigate the subject industriously, to perceive how clearly has been demonstrated the existence of a nation of worshippers of the true God, more ancient than all the Chaldeans, Egyptians, and Greeks. What necessity, however, is there at present to specify those who, anterior to Noah, were both devout men, and permitted to hold converse with the true God, inasmuch as, so far as the subject taken in hand is concerned, this testimony in regard of the antiquity of the people of God is sufficient? But since it does not seem irrational to prove that these nations that had their attention engrossed with the speculations of philosophy are of more modern date than those that had habitually worshipped the true God, it is reasonable that we should state both whence the family of these latter originated, and that when they took up their abode in these countries, they did not receive a name from the actual localities, but claimed for themselves names from those who were primarily born, and had inhabited these. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these the entire family of man was multiplied, and every quarter of the earth owes its inhabitants in the first instance to these. For the word of God to them prevailed, when the Lord said, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth." So great efficacy had that one word that from the 3 sons of Noah are begotten in the family 72 children, viz. From Shem, 25. From Japheth, 15. And from Ham, 32. Unto Ham, however, these 32 children are born in accordance with previous declarations. And among Ham's children are Canaan, from whom came the Canaanites; Mizraim, from whom the Egyptians; Cush, from whom the Ethiopians; and Phut, from whom the Libyans. These, according to the language prevalent among them, are up to the present day styled by the appellation of their ancestors. Nay, even in the Greek tongue they are called by the names by which they have been now denominated. But even supposing that neither these localities had been previously inhabited, nor that it could be proved that a race of men from the beginning existed there, nevertheless these sons of Noah, a worshipper of God, are quite sufficient to prove the point at issue. For it is evident that Noah himself must have been a disciple of devout people, for which reason he escaped the tremendous, though transient, threat of water. How, then, should not the worshippers of the true God be of greater antiquity than all Chaldeans, Egyptians, and Greeks? For we must bear in mind that the father of these Gentiles was born from this Japheth, and received the name Javan, and became the progenitor of Greeks and Ionians? Now, if the nations that devoted themselves to questions concerning philosophy are shown to belong to a period altogether more recent than the race of the worshippers of God as well as the time of the deluge, how would not the nations of the barbarians, and as many tribes as in the world are known and unknown, appear to belong to a more modern epoch than these? Therefore ye Greeks, Egyptians, Chaldeans, and the entire race of men, become adepts in this doctrine, and learn from us, who are the friends of God, what the nature of God is, and what his well-arranged creation. And we have cultivated this system, not expressing ourselves in mere pompous language, but executing our treatises in terms that prove our knowledge of truth and our practice of good sense, our object being the demonstration of his truth. The first and only, one God, both Creator and Lord of all, had nothing coeval with himself, not infinite chaos, nor measureless water, nor solid earth, nor dense air, not warm fire, nor refined spirit, nor the azure canopy of the stupendous firmament. But he was one, alone in himself. By an exercise of his will he created things that are, which antecedently had no existence, except that he willed to make them. For he is fully acquainted with whatever is about to take place, for foreknowledge also is present to him. The different principles, however, of what will come into existence, he first fabricated, viz. Fire and spirit, water and earth, from which diverse elements he proceeded to form his own creation. And some objects he formed of one essence, but others he compounded from two, and others from three, and others from four. And those formed of one substance were immortal, for in their case dissolution does not follow, for what is one will never be dissolved. Those, on the other hand, which are formed out of two, or three, or four substances, are dissoluble. Wherefore also are they named mortal. For this has been denominated death, namely, the dissolution of substances connected. I now therefore think that I have sufficiently answered those endued with a sound mind, who, if they are desirous of additional instruction, and are disposed accurately to investigate the substances of these things, and the causes of the entire creation, will become acquainted with these points should they peruse a work of ours comprised, under the title, Concerning the Substance of the Universe. I consider, however, that at present it is enough to elucidate those causes of which the Greeks, not being aware, glorified, in pompous phraseology, the parts of creation, while they remained ignorant of the Creator. And from these the heresiarchs have taken occasion, and have transformed the statements previously made by those Greeks into similar doctrines, and thus have framed ridiculous heresies. Therefore this solitary and supreme deity, by an exercise of reflection, brought forth the Logos first. Not the word in the sense of being articulated by voice, but as a ratiocination of the universe, conceived and residing in the divine mind. Him alone he produced from existing things. For the Father himself constituted existence, and the being born from him was the cause of all things that are produced. The Logos was in the Father himself, bearing the will of his progenitor, and not being unacquainted with the mind of the Father. For simultaneously with his procession from his progenitor, inasmuch as he is this progenitor's firstborn, he has, as a voice in himself, the ideas conceived in the Father. And so it was, that when the Father ordered the world to come into existence, the Logos one by one completed each object of creation, thus pleasing God. And some things which multiply by generation he formed male and female. But whatsoever beings were designed for service and ministration he made either male, or not requiring females, or neither male nor female. For even the primary substances of these, which were formed out of nonentities, viz. Fire and spirit, water and earth, are neither male nor female. Nor could male or female proceed from any one of these, were it not that God, who is the source of all authority, wished that the Logos might render assistance in accomplishing a production of this kind. I confess that angels are of fire, and I maintain that female spirits are not present with them. And I am of opinion that sun and moon and stars, in like manner, are produced from fire and spirit, and are neither male nor female. And the will of the Creator is, that swimming and winged animals are from water, male and female. For so God, whose will it was, ordered that there should exist a moist substance, endued with productive power. And in like manner God commanded, that from earth should arise reptiles and beasts, as well males and females of all sorts of animals, for so the nature of the things produced admitted. For as many things as he willed, God made from time to time. These things he created through the Logos, it not being possible for things to be generated otherwise than as they were produced. But when, according as he willed, he also formed objects, he called them by names, and thus notified his creative effort. And making these, he formed the ruler of all, and fashioned him out of all composite substances. The Creator did not wish to make him a god, and failed in his aim. Nor an angel, be not deceived, but a man. For if he had willed to make thee a god, he could have done so. Thou hast the example of the Logos. His will, however, was, that you should be a man, and he has made thee a man. But if thou art desirous of also becoming a god, obey him that has created thee, and resist not now, in order that, being found faithful in that which is small, you may be enabled to have entrusted to you also that which is great. The Logos alone of this God is from God himself. Wherefore also the Logos is God, being the substance of God. Now the world was made from nothing. Wherefore it is not God. As also because this world admits of dissolution whenever the Creator so wishes it. But God, who created it, did not, nor does not, make evil. He makes what is glorious and excellent, for he who makes it is good. Now man, that was brought into existence, was a creature endued with a capacity of self-determination, yet not possessing a sovereign intellect, nor holding sway over all things by reflection, and authority, and power, but a slave to his passions, and comprising all sorts of contrarieties in himself. But man, from the fact of his possessing a capacity of self-determination, brings forth what is evil, that is, accidentally. Which evil is not consummated except you actually commit some piece of wickedness. For it is in regard of our desiring anything that is wicked, or our meditating upon it, that what is evil is so denominated. Evil had no existence from the beginning, but came into being subsequently. Since man has free will, a law has been defined for his guidance by the deity, not without answering a good purpose. For if man did not possess the power to will and not to will, why should a law be established? For a law will not be laid down for an animal devoid of reason, but a bridle and a whip. Whereas to man has been given a precept and penalty to perform, or for not carrying into execution what has been enjoined. For man thus constituted has a law been enacted by just men in primitive ages. Nearer our own day was there established a law, full of gravity and justice, by Moses, to whom allusion has been already made, a devout man, and one beloved of God. Now the Logos of God controls all these. The first begotten child of the Father, the voice of the dawn antecedent to the morning star. Afterwards just men were born, friends of God, and these have been styled prophets, on account of their foreshowing future events. And the word of prophecy was committed unto them, not for one age only, but also the utterances of events predicted throughout all generations, were vouchsafed in perfect clearness. And this, too, not at the time merely when seers furnished a reply to those present, but also events that would happen throughout all ages, have been manifested beforehand. Because, in speaking of incidents gone by, the prophets brought them back to the recollection of humanity. Whereas, in showing forth present occurrences, they endeavored to persuade men not to be remiss. While, by foretelling future events, they have rendered each one of us terrified on beholding events that had been predicted long before, and on expecting likewise those events predicted as still future. Such is our faith. O all ye men, ours, I say, who are not persuaded by empty expressions, nor caught away by sudden impulses of the heart, nor beguiled by the plausibility of eloquent discourses, yet who do not refuse to obey words that have been uttered by divine power. And these injunctions has God given to the Word. But the Word, by declaring them, promulgated the divine commandments, thereby turning man from disobedience, not bringing him into servitude by force of necessity, but summoning him to liberty through a choice involving spontaneity. This Logos the Father in the latter days sent forth, no longer to speak by a prophet, and not wishing that the word, being obscurely proclaimed, should be made the subject of mere conjecture, but that he should be manifested, so that we could see him with our own eyes. This Logos, I say, the Father sent forth, in order that the world, on beholding him, might reverence him who was delivering precepts not by the person of prophets, nor terrifying the soul by an angel, but who was himself, he that had spoken, corporally present amongst us. This Logos we know to have received a body from a virgin, and to have remodeled the old man by a new creation. And we believe the Logos to have passed through every period in this life, in order that he himself might serve as a law for every age, and that, by being present amongst us, he might exhibit his own manhood as an aim for all men. And that by himself in person he might prove that God made nothing evil, and that man possesses the capacity of self-determination, inasmuch as he is able to will and not to will, and is endued with power to do both. This man we know to have been made out of the compound of our humanity. For if he were not of the same nature with ourselves, in vain does he ordain that we should imitate the teacher. For if that man happened to be of a different substance from us, why does he lay injunctions similar to those he has received on myself, who am born weak? And how is this the act of one that is good and just? In order, however, that he might not be supposed to be different from us, he even underwent toil, and was willing to endure hunger, and did not refuse to feel thirst, and sunk into the quietude of slumber. He did not protest against his passion, but became obedient unto death, and manifested his resurrection. Now in all these acts he offered up, as the first fruits, his own manhood, in order that thou, when thou art in tribulation, mayest not be disheartened, but, confessing thyself to be a man, of like nature with the Redeemer, mayest dwell in expectation of also receiving what the Father has granted unto the Son. Such is the true doctrine in regard of the divine nature, O ye men, Greeks and barbarians, Chaldeans and Assyrians, Egyptians and Libyans, Indians and Ethiopians, Celts, and ye Latins, who lead armies, and all ye that inhabit Europe, and Asia, and Libya. And to you I am become an adviser, inasmuch as I am a disciple of the benevolent Logos, and hence humane, in order that you may hasten and by us may be taught who the true God is, and what is his well-ordered creation. Do not devote your attention to the fallacies of artificial discourses, nor the vain promises of plagiarizing heretics, but to the venerable simplicity of unassuming truth. And by means of this knowledge you shall escape the approaching threat of the fire of judgment, and the rayless scenery of gloomy Tartarus, where never shines a beam from the irradiating voice of the Word. You shall escape the boiling flood of hell's eternal lake of fire and the eye ever fixed in menacing glare of fallen angels chained in Tartarus as punishment for their sins. And you shall escape the worm that ceaselessly coils for food around the body whose scum has bred it. Now such torments as these shalt thou avoid by being instructed in a knowledge of the true God. And thou shalt possess an immortal body, even one placed beyond the possibility of corruption, just like the soul. And thou shalt receive the kingdom of heaven, thou who, whilst thou didst sojourn in this life, didst know the celestial King. And thou shalt be a companion of the deity, and a co-heir with Christ, no longer enslaved by lusts or passions, and never again wasted by disease. For thou hast become God. For whatever sufferings thou didst undergo while being a man, these he gave to thee, because thou wast of mortal mold. But whatever it is consistent with God to impart, these God has promised to bestow upon thee, because thou hast been deified, and begotten unto immortality. This constitutes the import of the proverb, know thyself, i.e., discover God within thyself, for he has formed thee after his own image. For with the knowledge of self is conjoined the being an object of God's knowledge, for thou art called by the deity himself. Be not therefore inflamed, O ye men, with enmity one towards another, nor hesitate to retrace with all speed your steps. For Christ is the God above all, and he has arranged to wash away sin from human beings, rendering regenerate the old man. And God called man his likeness from the beginning, and has evinced in a figure his love towards thee. And provided thou obeyest his solemn injunctions, and becomest a faithful follower of him who is good, thou shalt resemble him, inasmuch as thou shalt have honor conferred upon thee by him. For the deity, by condescension, does not diminish aught of the divinity of his divine perfection, having made thee even God unto his glory.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A Setting of Silver. The audio you've been listening to was produced by Bill Connick using Google's text-to-speech service. The text was taken from an 1885 collection of early church writings available at ccel.org. Finally, I want to thank the volunteers at CCEL who organized and formatted the data into a computer-friendly format. Without their work, this would have been practically impossible to create.